Good morning, doctor. My name is Yuexin Metric number is 190815. Today I'm going to present about my FYP. The FYP title is Economic Growth and CO2 Emission in China, Environmental Kuznets Curve. So this one is the contents of my presentation, totally 5 chapters. The first chapter is about the introduction, and this one is the background of the research. The climate change has been one of the problems facing all over the world, and with the rapid growth of the economy, energy use and pollution increase, and the carbon emission also increase. The rise of the CO2 concentration has already affected the living environment of the human beings. And the China's economic growth and the CO2 emission in 2010, the Chinese GDP ranking in the world economy it already became the first two. And in 2007, the Chinese energy consumption increased to 1.96 billion tons, and the CO2 emission already increased to 6.7 billion tons. And these two tables show that the Chinese the ranking in the world about the CO2 emission and the GDP. The process of energy saving and emission reduction. So we have the Kyoto Protocol, Copenhagen Accord, and the Paris Agreement. The problem statement is that about the economic growth, the demand for energy will increase in the future, and China also faces a situation in which environmental degradation and policy remedies coexist. And the environment Kuznets curve model points out that the increase in GDP will increase the level of CO2 emission and then reduce the level of emissions after reaching the peak. The objective of research is to determine how economic development, energy consumption, and the trade openness affect CO2 emission in China. The significance of a study firstly provide decision makers with some insights so that they can take more relevant measures to increase GDP and solve some of the current environmental problems. Secondly, although research focuses on China, it can also be applied to other developing or developed countries. The third chapter is about the literature review. The theoretical review, we have the environmental Kuznets curve. So this theory is to study the relationship between environmental quality and economic growth. And the second one is the pollution heaven hypothesis, is the transfer of the environmental degradation caused by pollution. The empirical reviews CO2 emission and the economic growth. So those studies found that there is a strong long-term relationship between CO2 emission per capita and actual GDP per capita, and also economic growth will help improve the environmental quality in the future. The CO2 emission, energy consumption, and economic growth. The energy consumption has to stimulate the economic growth and the CO2 emission, and also economic growth will promote the energy consumption. CO2 emission, energy consumption, and the trade openness, economic growth. So carbon emission mainly depend on income and energy consumption. And although trade has a positive effect on carbon dioxide emission, it has a very little impact. The third chapter is about research methodology. So the theoretical framework that we use is the pollution heaven hypothesis, based on the disparity between developed and developing countries in environmental restrictions, which makes developing countries has environmental cost advantage relative to developed countries. The model specification. is like this one, but we have to transform all the variable into the natural logarithm form to standardize the variables. The estimation method, we use the OLS, ordinary least squares, and the diagnosis test, like the normality test, recipe test, and the theory correlation LM test, and the heteroscedasticity test. So this table shows all the details about the variables. Chapter 4 is about the analysis and the discussion. So this one is about the regression result. After that, we do the normality test. We can conclude that the errors are nominally distributed. For the Ramsey reset test, the probability is higher than 0.05. We can conclude that there is no misspecification in the model. The multicollinearity, all the central area F are larger than 10 except LTO. It means that the multicollinearity problems are existing in this model. Autocorrelation, the probability is less than 0.05. So we can conclude that there is an autocorrelation problem among the variables. The heteroscedasticity, so the probability is over than 0.05. So we can conclude that there is no misspecification in the model. And we use the first differences of the variable. So after that, the probability is higher than 0.05. So we can conclude there is no autocorrelation problem among the variable. And also the central VAF of tree variable is below than 10. So there is no multicollinearity problem in the regression. The ordinary least square result, there are autocorrelation and the multicollinearity problem in this model. Based on the result obtained, the energy consumption variable and the GDP both shows the positively significant relationship with the CO2 emission, and the trade openness is higher, is also shows the positive significant relationship with the CO2 emission, since its p-value is still less than 0.05. And next chapter is about the conclusion and recommendation. For summary, the strong relation have been found between economic growth and the CO2 emission of China, because the growth of GDP per capita is also showing enhancement in environment pollution per capita. It means the economic development in China is unfortunately giving a boost to sustainability problems in the country. The same relationship has been found between energy consumption and the CO2 emission problem in China. There is a strong and direct both bond between these variables of the study, because after the industrialization in China, the use of energy has been increased in the local sectors. However, an association of trade openness of China with CO2 emission has been disclosed. The policy recommendation, the policymakers cannot forego economic growth, but can control the industry that release CO2. For example, the standard related to CO2 emission should be set for industry in China, and there should be different green and sustainability policy for trading activities in China, so that the actors involved in the export or import of the country would be ensure the protection of the environment in their daily activity. And the government department should support relevant enterprises in R&D and development, and introduce comprehensive green energy subsidy policies that are in line with international standards to reduce the cost of enterprises that develop green energy. So that's all from me. So thank you for listening.